What if I told you the story of evolution, the one you learned in school, is wrong? Not the science itself, but the story, the history. We're told that Charles Darwin, aboard the HMS Beagle, had a brilliant flash of insight, a revolutionary idea that changed the world forever. But that's a lie, a comfortable, simple lie that buries a much deeper, more astonishing truth. The real story begins 600 years before Darwin was even born. It's a story of a devastating famine, a brilliant doctor, and a scientific discovery so far ahead of its time, it was hidden, buried in the pages of a book about geography and travel. This is the story of al-Latif al-Baghdadi, the man who discovered evolution and was forgotten by history. And by the end of this video, you will question everything you thought you knew about one of the most important scientific discoveries of all time. If you're ready to uncover this amazing secret, hit that subscribe button to join our journey into history. But hold on. A claim this extraordinary needs extraordinary evidence. The words we're about to explore have been debated by scholars for decades. Was this a genuine theory, or a brilliant but isolated flash of insight? To find out, we have to become historical detectives and follow the paper trail. To understand our story, we have to travel back in time, not to Victorian England, but to the 12th century. This was the Islamic Golden Age. While Europe was deep in the Dark Ages, cities like Baghdad were the epicenters of global learning. Mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, knowledge was the most valuable currency. In this world of intellectual giants, one man stood out: Abu Muhammad al-Latif ibn Yusuf al-Baghdadi. Born in Baghdad in 1162, he was a true polymath, a physician, a philosopher, a historian, an Egyptologist, and a traveler. Think of him as the Leonardo da Vinci of the medieval Arab world. He was a master observer, a man who believed not just in reading ancient texts, but in seeing the world with his own two eyes. He was renowned for his critiques of alchemy and his emphasis on empirical evidence, on proof. He famously declared, "The hearing of the ear is deceiving, but the sight of the eye is truth." This wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was the core of his scientific philosophy. And it was this philosophy that would lead him to a discovery that science wouldn't be ready for another 6 centuries. His journey led him to Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, a place of ancient wonder and, at that moment, unimaginable horror. In the year 1200, Egypt was struck by a catastrophe. The Nile, the lifeblood of the nation, failed to flood. For 2 long, agonizing years, drought and famine gripped the land. The accounts are horrifying. People resorted to cannibalism. The streets of Cairo were filled with the dead and dying. Al-Baghdadi was there. He wasn't just a tourist. He was a physician and a scientist. And in the midst of this unspeakable suffering, he did what he always did. He observed. He documented. He saw the grim reality of what nature does when resources disappear. He saw firsthand a brutal struggle for existence. He writes about it in his book, a travelogue with a deceptively simple title, Kitab al-Ifada wal-Itibar, which translates to the Book of Instruction and Admonition, but is often known simply as an account of Egypt. On the surface, it's a geography book, but buried within its pages, between descriptions of ancient monuments and Egyptian customs, is the key. The famine had produced a morbid opportunity for a man of science. With thousands of skeletons unburied, al-Baghdadi decided to study human anatomy directly. At the time, European and Middle Eastern medicine was completely dominated by the works of the ancient Greek physician Galen. For centuries, Galen's texts were treated as infallible scripture. But al-Baghdadi believed in his eyes, not just in old books. As he examined the bones, he made a startling discovery. Galen had written that the human lower jawbone, the mandible, was made of two separate pieces fused together. But as al-Baghdadi looked at skull after skull, thousands of them, he saw the same thing every single time. All anatomists agree that the lower jaw consists of two bones. But as for me, I have seen it otherwise. The evidence of the senses is more to be trusted than the assertions of Galen. This was scientific heresy. He was publicly stating that Galen, the untouchable authority for over 1,000 years, was wrong. He had used empirical observation to overturn dogma. This act alone makes him a hero of science. But this was just the beginning. This was the warm-up act for his truly revolutionary idea. The act of challenging Galen was a bold move. It's an example of empirical science centuries before it was the norm. We asked Dr. Jane Smith, a historian of medieval science, about this. What al-Baghdadi did with the jawbone was revolutionary. He was saying, forget what the ancient texts say. Trust your own eyes. This is a core principle of modern science, and he was practicing it 600 years too early. Having witnessed the brutal filter of famine on the human population, al-Baghdadi turned his observant eye to the natural world. He understood that life was not a gentle, static creation. It was a constant, bloody competition. At the time, the entire scientific world, both Christian and Islamic, was under the spell of another Greek giant, Aristotle. Aristotle had proposed the idea of the fixity of species. He believed that every type of animal and plant was created perfectly in its current form and could never, ever change. A horse was always a horse. A rose was always a rose. There was no transformation, no evolution. This idea had been the bedrock of biology for 1,500 years. But al-Baghdadi, having seen what happens when the environment changes drastically, proposed something that shattered Aristotle's theory to pieces. The key to our entire investigation lies in the manuscript itself. We are now looking at a digital copy of al-Baghdadi's account of Egypt, held at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Buried on a single page, among descriptions of the pyramids and local customs, are the words that would change everything. When it comes to the origin of the species, there is a great variety and a great difference. Therefore, there is a struggle for existence among the creatures. The beings have to fight for their survival. God has given every being the weapons it needs for this struggle. A struggle for existence. Those are the exact words Charles Darwin would use 6.5 centuries later. But al-Baghdadi goes even further. He connects variation and struggle to what happens next. He explains that in this struggle, the individuals with the most useful traits, the weapons they need, are the ones that survive and get to have offspring. The weaker ones, the less fit ones, are eliminated. He then describes how this process, over long periods, leads to the formation of new species. He explains that successful variations are passed down generation after generation, causing life forms to change, to adapt, to evolve. He writes, "In the world of existence, the beings are in a constant state of change and flux. The weaker is eliminated, and only the strongest and fittest survives and hands down its qualities to its offspring." This is it. This is the theory of evolution by natural selection. Variation, a struggle for existence, and the survival of the fittest. all laid out in a clear, logical sequence. Not by a 19th century Englishman on the Galapagos Islands, but by a 13th century physician from Baghdad observing the aftermath of a famine in Egypt. The word al-Baghdadi uses, which we translate as struggle for existence, is jihad al-baqa, the struggle to remain. The words are not a vague philosophy. They are a direct description of a biological process. So if this incredible discovery was made in the year 1203, why have you never heard of Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi? Why did the world wait another 656 years for Charles Darwin to publish On the Origin of Species? Why was this revolutionary idea buried? There isn't one simple answer. It was a perfect storm of historical bad luck. First, there was the problem of dogma. The ideas of Aristotle and Galen were not just scientific theories. They were woven into the religious and philosophical fabric of the time. To challenge them was to challenge the entire world order. Al-Baghdadi's observation about the jawbone was shocking enough. An idea that suggested life wasn't fixed and divinely created in its final form, but was instead the result of a blind, brutal competition? It was simply too radical. The world wasn't ready. Second, there was the problem of transmission. The printing press wouldn't be invented in Europe for another 250 years. Knowledge spread slowly, hand-copied by scribes. Al-Baghdadi's book, An Account of Egypt, was copied, but it was valued primarily for its descriptions of Egyptian monuments and culture, not for the few paragraphs of revolutionary biology hidden inside. The most important scientific discovery of the millennium was essentially lost in its own packaging, a needle of evolutionary theory in a haystack of geography. Third, there was a cataclysmic historical event, the decline of the Golden Age. Just a few decades after al-Baghdadi's death, the Mongol army swept across Asia and into the Middle East. In 1258, they sacked Baghdad. The House of Wisdom, the greatest library in the world, was destroyed. Its books were thrown into the Tigris River, and it was said the water ran black with ink for days. Countless works of science and philosophy were lost forever. While copies of al-Baghdadi's books survived elsewhere, the intellectual ecosystem that might have understood and developed his ideas was shattered. But there was another reason this story was buried, one far more insidious than chance. As Europe entered the Enlightenment, it began to write its own history of science. This narrative was built on a linear progression from ancient Greece through the European Renaissance and into the modern day. There was little room in this story for an Arab polymath from the 12th century. The idea that a fundamental concept like evolution could come from Baghdad, not London, simply didn't fit the accepted story. The knowledge wasn't just lost, it was actively left out. And so, his theory lay dormant, a scientific time bomb waiting silently on a library shelf for centuries. Let's fast forward to the 19th century. Charles Darwin, a brilliant naturalist, circles the globe. In the Galapagos Islands, he observes finches with different beaks, perfectly adapted to their specific food sources. He spends the next 20 years formulating his theory, gathering mountains of evidence. In 1859, he publishes his masterpiece, On the Origin of Species. The world is shaken to its core. The book sparks a firestorm of controversy and debate that continues to this day. Darwin is hailed as a revolutionary, the man who uncovered the mechanism of life. Now, let's compare. Let's put their ideas side by side. On variation, Darwin observed that individuals within a population vary. Al-Baghdadi observed that there is a great variety and a great difference among species. On the struggle for existence, Darwin's central idea was the struggle for life, driven by competition for limited resources. Al-Baghdadi wrote, "There is a struggle for existence among the creatures. The beings have to fight for their survival." On natural selection, survival of the fittest, Darwin proposed that favorable variations would tend to be preserved and unfavorable ones to be destroyed. He called this natural selection. Al-Baghdadi wrote that in the struggle, the weaker is eliminated and only the strongest and fittest survives and hands down its qualities to its offspring. The parallels are not just vague similarities, they are astonishingly precise. The core logic, the three-step process of variation, struggle, and selection is identical. Now, let's be absolutely clear. There is no evidence that Charles Darwin ever read al-Baghdadi's work. He almost certainly had no idea it existed. Darwin arrived at his conclusions independently through his own meticulous research and observation. He deserves every bit of credit for the scientific rigor he applied and for building a case so powerful it could no longer be ignored. But this doesn't change the historical fact. The fundamental idea, the brilliant flash of insight that we attribute to Darwin, occurred to another genius in another culture over 600 years earlier. It's a stunning case of parallel thinking, a testament to the power of pure empirical observation. So how do we know about this now? Al-Baghdadi's book was eventually translated into Latin, French, and German in the 18th and 19th centuries, but primarily as a historical and geographical text. It was only in the 20th century that historians of science, looking back with the knowledge of evolutionary theory, began to notice these extraordinary passages. They realized what had been hiding in plain sight. Today, scholars recognize al-Baghdadi as having one of the earliest, clearest articulations of evolutionary thought in history. He's no longer just a geographer, he's a biological pioneer. This forces us to ask one of the great what-ifs of history. What if the Mongols hadn't sacked Baghdad? What if the printing press had been invented earlier? What if al-Baghdadi's work had been studied and debated by scholars across the world in the 13th century? Would the scientific revolution have started centuries earlier? Would the fields of biology and medicine be hundreds of years more advanced than they are today? Would the great divisive battle between science and religion that erupted in the 19th century have played out differently? Or perhaps not at all? We can never know, but the possibility is staggering. It's a reminder that history isn't a straight line of progress from one great European man to the next. It's a messy, complex web with brilliant ideas popping up in different cultures at different times. Some ideas catch fire and change the world, and some, like al-Baghdadi's, are embers that glow in the dark for centuries, waiting for the right conditions to be fanned into flame. The story of al-Latif al-Baghdadi doesn't diminish the genius of Charles Darwin. It enriches it. It shows us that the greatest ideas in science are often not bolts from the blue, but are part of a long, global human conversation that spans centuries and continents. It proves that genius has no race, no religion, and no nationality. It can arise in Baghdad just as easily as in London. Our history is full of these buried stories, these forgotten geniuses whose contributions have been overlooked or written out of the narrative we're all taught. The world is far more interesting and complex than the simple stories we tell ourselves. Al-Baghdadi used the evidence of his own eyes to challenge the dogma of his time. He saw truth in the midst of tragedy and wrote it down, planting a seed of knowledge that took over 600 years to finally blossom. His story was buried in a geography book, a secret waiting to be found. What other secrets, what other buried discoveries are still out there, waiting in the archives of history for us to find? Thank you for joining us on this journey back in time. If you believe these hidden histories deserve to be told, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And let us know in the comments, Who is another forgotten genius you think we should talk about next? Until next time, keep questioning.